Right then, settle in, get the light down low, and let's spend a while in Middle-earth. Not marching across it this time, just needling the bits that don't quite add up. The moments in The Lord of the Rings where, if you stop and actually think through the logistics, you find yourself going, hang on, that doesn't work, does it? People call them plot holes. I think that's a bit harsh for most of them, but it's the word everyone reaches for, so we'll run with it. I should say straight off, none of this comes from a sour place. I adore this story, the books and the films both, for different reasons, and I think the whole thing is about as ambitious as storytelling gets. A completely invented world with its own languages and family trees and maps folded into the back. And somehow, sitting inside all that scale, a story that feels small and warm and close. So if I spend the next while prodding at the soft spots, know that it's the affectionate kind of prodding. The kind you only really do with something you know inside out and love regardless. One thing that'll matter all evening. When someone talks about a Lord of the Rings plot hole, they might mean one of two fairly different things. There's what Tolkien actually wrote, the books, and then there's what Peter Jackson did, adapting it for the cinema, across those three films at the turn of the millennium. A surprising number of the famous head-scratchers aren't Tolkien's at all. They're things that got changed, trimmed, or invented outright to squeeze an unfilmably huge book onto a screen. Working out which is honestly a good part of the fun, so I'll point it out along the way, gently, without letting it curdle into a seminar. A quick, quiet word, and then I'll leave it be. If this channel is the sort of thing you'd like more of, a subscribe is free, and it does make a real difference to whether I get to keep making them. That's the whole of the pitch. Now, back to the serious work of lying very still in the dark and thinking about elves. So, a ring that has to be destroyed, one very small person to carry it, and an extremely long way to walk. We may as well begin with the big one, the argument that has been quietly ending friendships in comment sections for 20 years. The Eagles. You know the image. The very end of it all, Frodo and Sam collapsed on a rock in the middle of an erupting volcano, and then out of the sky come these enormous eagles, and Gandalf is riding one of them, and they scoop the hobbits up and carry them to safety. It's a lovely moment. It's also the moment where a certain kind of viewer sits up and says, wait a minute, hang on, if the eagles can fly to Mount Doom at the end, why couldn't they just fly the ring there at the beginning and save everyone an enormous amount of trouble? And honestly, fair, it's a completely reasonable thing to notice. If you've got giant flying birds who are clearly willing to help, and you've got a ring that needs to go to a specific mountain, the obvious solution is to put the ring on the bird and point the bird at the mountain. The entire trilogy could have been a long weekend. I understand why this one drives people up the wall, because on the surface it looks like the whole story only happens because nobody thought of the easy answer. But the more time you spend with it, the more the easy answer falls apart. And I actually find the reasons quite satisfying once you lay them out gently. The first thing is that the eagles aren't a taxi service. This matters more than it sounds. In Tolkien's world, the great eagles are proud, ancient, free creatures. They serve Manwë, who is more or less the chief of the godlike powers that watch over the world, and they turn up when it suits some larger purpose, not when someone needs a lift. They're not tame. Nobody in the story has the standing to just order them about. And the idea of loading the most dangerous object in the world onto one of them and asking it to run an errand rather misunderstands what they are. They're closer to visiting royalty than to a helpful drone. Then there's the bigger problem, which is the one I think actually holds the whole thing together. The entire plan depended on nobody noticing. The reason a couple of hobbits walking is a good idea and a squadron of giant eagles is a terrible idea is that S by Ron is watching the skies. He has flying servants of his own, the Nazgul on their winged beasts, and above all he has that great searching attention, the eye, always looking for exactly this kind of thing. A speck on foot in the wilderness is beneath his notice, a formation of eagles making a beeline for the one mountain where his ring can be unmade is about the least subtle thing you could possibly do. Somebody put this rather well once, that the moment the Dark Lord realises there's a plan to destroy the ring, rather than to use it against him, he turns his entire war into a hunt for the ring bearer. And a flying delivery is basically a signed confession of the plan. There's also the ring itself, which never stops working on whoever's near it. Get a ring bearer up high and close to Emor Door, hours in the open air near the heart of Essoron's power, and you're asking for the ring to reach out and take hold. The whole reason the journey is done slowly and secretly and on foot is that speed and visibility are the enemy here, not friends. Now I'll be honest with you, even with all that, there's a softer version of the question that's harder to wave away. Not why didn't they fly the ring all the way to the fire, but why didn't the Fellowship at least get a lift over the mountains, the way they later got a lift out? And the answer there is weaker. The best you can really say is that every hour those birds are in the air is an hour of exposure, and that the eagles simply weren't offering, and that the plan was secrecy above all else. There's a nice observation among the people who study this properly, that the explanations for not flying the ring to the mountain are genuinely good, and the explanations for not even trying to get a ride across the misty mountains are a bit thinner. I think that's true, and I think it's fine. Not every choice in a story has to be optimal. People and hobbits and wizards make do with the plan in front of them. There's a lovely idea I keep coming back to whenever the eagle question gets raised, which is that a plot hole is often more about the viewer than the film. You decide what you're going to be bothered by. If you've fallen for the world, the walk is the point, the fellowship is the point, the slow grind of two small people carrying something dreadful across a ruined landscape is the entire emotional engine of the thing. And if you haven't fallen for it, then yes, you sit there thinking about the birds. I've been both kinds of viewer at different times in my life, usually depending on how tired I was. Tonight I'm firmly in the camp of let them walk. The eagles have better things to do. Here's an image for you. Frodo, terrified, exhausted, carrying the single most dangerous object in the world. And there's this odd fellow in a blue coat and yellow boots who takes the ring off him, plays with it between his fingers, slips it onto his finger without disappearing, and laughs. Then he tosses it in the air, and it disappears, and everyone gasps, and then he produces it again out of his other hand and gives it back like it was a coin trick at a birthday party. That's Tom Bombadil, and if you've only ever seen the films, you have no idea who I'm talking about, because he isn't in them at all. That's the first funny thing about Tom. Jackson cut him completely, and almost nobody complains, because he doesn't really move the story along. He shows up early in the book, in the old forest, rescues the hobbits from a nasty willow tree, and then from some barrow wights, puts them up for a couple of nights, sings a great deal, and then waves them off. And the whole time, there's this quiet, extraordinary fact sitting in the corner of the room. The ring doesn't work on him. At all. He can see Frodo when Frodo puts it on, and vanishes. He can wear it himself, and stay completely visible. It has no pull on him. No whisper. Nothing. Everyone else in the entire story who gets near this thing feels it tugging at them, and Tom treats it like a party favour. So the obvious question, and the book is smart enough to actually raise it out loud, is why not just give the ring to Tom? If it can't corrupt him, stick it in his house, in the forest, and let him mind it forever. Problem solved. And I love that Tolkien lets the wise people at the Council of Elrond sit and genuinely consider this, because it means we don't have to feel clever for thinking of it. The reason they turn it down is beautifully simple once you hear it. Gandalf points out that it isn't that Tom has power over the ring, it's that the ring has no power over him, which is a different thing entirely. And because the ring means nothing to him, he'd be a terrible guardian for it. He'd forget about it. he'd put it down somewhere and wander off after an interesting beetle. Things like that just don't stick in his mind. You can't trust the most important object in the world to someone who is constitutionally incapable of taking it seriously. That's a wonderful little bit of logic, actually. The very thing that makes him immune is the thing that makes him useless as a keeper. And there's a deeper point underneath it. One of the elves at the council, Galdor, says something I think about a lot, that the power to defy the enemy is not in Tom unless that power is in the earth itself. Because that's what Tom sort of is. He's nature, or the spirit of a place, something old and self-contained that predates all the politics and the wars. And the whole grim lesson of the story is that nature on its own can't save you from something like S.O.W. Ron. If S.O.W. Ron won everywhere else, he'd get to the forest eventually, and Tom would be the last to fall, but he'd fall. Hiding the ring in a quiet green corner just delays the ending. It doesn't change it, which leaves the question of what Tom actually is. And here's where I have to tell you something slightly disappointing and also slightly wonderful. Nobody knows, and that's on purpose. He calls himself the eldest. He says he was here before the river and the trees, that he remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn, that he knew the dark before the Dark Lord came from outside. When Frodo asks Goldberry, who is sort of Tom's wife, who Tom is, she just says he is, which has sent people down theological rabbit holes for 70 years, wondering if he's a god or an angel or the world itself given a face. And then you find out where Tom actually came from, and it deflates the whole mystery in the most charming way possible. Tolkien said he was, more or less, just an invention. He'd existed in little poems years before The Lord of the Rings was even a thought. And the original inspiration, apparently, was a Dutch doll that belonged to one of Tolkien's sons. The doll had a fine feather in its hat, and one of the other children didn't like it and tried to stuff it down the toilet, and it got rescued, and it became a character in bedtime stories. So the oldest and most unknowable being in Middle-earth, the one thing the ring can't touch, started life as a toy that survived an attempted drowning. I find that completely delightful. Tolkien himself said that even in a mythical age, there have to be a few enigmas, the way there always are, and that Tom was one of them deliberately. Some things in a story work best as a shrug and a smile. Tom is the shrug and the smile, no notes. Let's go back to before the story we know, because there's a plot hole hiding right at the start that the films actually put front and centre in that big prologue battle that opens the very first one. You've got the last great alliance of elves and men against S.O. Ron, thousands of years before Frodo is even born. S.O. Ron is on the field himself, swatting soldiers aside, and then a young man called Isildur, whose father has just been killed, picks up the broken shard of his father's sword and cuts the ring straight off Sauron's hand. And that's it. Sauron's body is undone, his armies scatter, and the ring is just sitting there on Isildur's palm. Now here's the moment that could have ended everything. Isildur is standing more or less on the doorstep of Mount Doom. The one place in the entire world where the ring can be destroyed is right there. And Elrond, who is present, takes him to the very edge of the fire and tells him to throw it in. Just drop it, unmake it now, while you have it and while it's weak. And Isildur looks at it, this thing that just cost him his father, and he says no. He keeps it. He walks back out of the mountain with the ring on a chain around his neck, and in doing so, he hands thousands of years of misery to everyone who comes after him. And you want to shout at him? You really do. Just open your fingers. It's right there. But of course that's the whole point. And it's the first time the story shows you what the ring does, before you've even met a hobbit. It doesn't corrupt you with a big dramatic speech. It corrupts you by making the obvious right thing feel, in the moment, completely impossible. Isildur isn't a fool. He's the hero of the battle. He's just had the ring in his hand for about 5 minutes, and already it has him. It has already made Keep Me feel like his own idea, The films tidy this up a bit and the books go into more detail, but the shape is the same, and I think it's one of the smartest choices in the whole thing. Because every single time, later in the story, when you find yourself thinking, oh come on, just destroy it, just give it up, why is this so hard? You can look back at Isildur at the crack of doom and remember. Even a genuinely good and brave man, standing at the one spot in the world where it would have been easy, couldn't do it. Frodo, right at the very end, in the exact same place, can't do it either. Nobody can. That's not a plot hole, that's the engine. What I do think is a fair thing to sit with is the elves. Elrond is right there. Círdan, another very old and wise elf, is around for this whole period too. And the thing about elves is that persuading a stubborn young man is one option, but they had a lot of power in those days. You do wonder, in a story sense, why nobody pushed harder. Why it became a polite argument at the edge of a volcano rather than something more forceful. The honest answer is that the ring was already working, and that taking it by force would have meant one of them wanting it, and wanting it is exactly the trap. The only clean way to be rid of it was for the person holding it to choose to let go, and the person holding it never, ever chooses that. So Isildur walks out with it, and everyone lets him, and the whole long sad history follows from a single hand that wouldn't open. I find that more haunting than any battle. Right, here's one that comes up constantly, and it's usually framed as the daftest thing in the whole story. Sauron, this ancient, cunning, world-conquering dark power, leaves the entrance to Mount Doom basically unguarded. The one place his ring can be destroyed. The single spot on the entire map that represents the end of him, and he doesn't put anyone there. Frodo and Sam, by the end, are stumbling right up to the fire, and there's nobody stopping them. No orcs at the door, no sentries guarding the entrance to Mount Doom itself. Nothing. And people quite reasonably say, look, you don't need a genius plan here. Just station a couple of orcs at the entrance and check that only the right people go in. It would have cost him almost nothing. And on the face of it, yes, it looks ridiculous. You've poured your entire self into this object. You know it can only be unmade in one specific fire, and you leave that fire propped open like a corner shop. If I were writing Sauron's performance review, that's the first line item. But here's where I think the complaint, satisfying as it is to make, actually walks straight into the real point of the character. Sauron doesn't guard Mount Doom because it genuinely does not occur to him that anyone would try to destroy the ring. And that's not stupidity, it's something much more interesting and much more true to life. Sauron understands power. He understands greed and ambition and the desire to dominate other people, because that is the entire content of his own mind. So when he imagines his enemies getting hold of the ring, he imagines exactly what he would do. He imagines one of the great and powerful, Gandalf maybe, or Galadriel, or the new king of men, picking it up and using it to make themselves a new Dark Lord and coming for his throne. That's the threat he prepares for. That's what he's watching for. Someone strong coming to take his place. The idea that his enemies would instead try to throw the ring away, to unmake power itself rather than seize it, is so far outside how he thinks that he can't even see it coming. It's a genuine blind spot in the truest sense. Not a gap in his defences, a gap in his imagination. He literally cannot picture the plan, so he doesn't defend against it. That's why two insignificant hobbits are the perfect delivery system. They're beneath his notice, and their goal is unthinkable to him, so he's looking entirely the wrong way the whole time. Once you see it like that, the unguarded mountain stops being a mistake and becomes the whole theme in miniature. The story is, in a lot of ways, about the difference between power and goodness, and about how the people obsessed with the first can't understand the second. Sauron's undoing is baked into who he is. He can't conceive of someone choosing to give up the ring, because he never could, so he never guards against it. And while we're here, This connects to an even bigger question people ask, which is why SOW Ron put so much of himself into the ring in the first place. Why make yourself breakable? Why tie your survival to a thing that can be lost or stolen or, apparently, dropped into a volcano by a gardener? The answer is that the ring is what made him overwhelmingly strong. Pouring his will into it let him dominate the other rings, and through them, the free peoples. It was an enormous power grab, and like most enormous power grabs, it came with an enormous risk attached, and he took the deal, because beings like him always take the deal. He gained the ability to nearly conquer the world, and the price was a single, fatal weakness he was too proud to believe anyone would ever exploit. Which is, when you say it out loud, an almost perfect little tragedy. He built the door to his own downfall, and then couldn't imagine anyone rude enough to walk through it. Let me tell you about a knife, a small one, hobbit-sized, that Tom Bombadil gives to Merry early in the story, from a barrow, one of those old burial mounds out on the downs. It's an unremarkable looking thing, and he carries it for ages without much coming of it. But that knife was forged an age ago by men of a lost northern kingdom, men who spent their lives fighting the powers of Mordor, and it was made with a very specific bane against that darkness baked into the metal. To wound the Witch King, a ring wraith, in a way no other blade could. Merry has no idea he's carrying exactly the right weapon for the worst moment of his life. He just has an old knife from a grave. Now jump forward to the great battle outside the White City. The Witch King, the leader of the ring wraiths, the single most terrifying thing on the field, has struck down the King of Rohan, and standing over the fallen king is one small figure who won't move, and the Witch King, who has believed himself untouchable for centuries, tells this figure, more or less, that no living man can hinder him. He isn't bluffing in his own mind. He genuinely believes it. And he has a reason too. The reason goes back a very long way to a prophecy spoken by an elf called Glorfindel after a battle in the north an age ago. Glorfindel watched the Witch King flee and told the men not to give chase because his doom lay far off and he would not fall by the hand of man. That's the whole of it. Not by the hand of man. And the Witch King has spent all the time since treating that line as a suit of armour, reading a foretelling as if it were a guarantee, which is exactly the mistake Macbeth makes, and Tolkien very likely had Macbeth in mind. In the play, there's a prophecy that no man of woman born can harm Macbeth, and he swaggers about feeling invincible right up until he meets the one man the wording doesn't quite cover. Tolkien seems to have thought Shakespeare rather cheated the payoff, and he wrote his own, more literal version of it. So the Witch King isn't protected by a spell that physically stops men from hurting him. He's protected by his own reading of a prophecy that was only ever a description of who would eventually get him, dressed up in his head as a rule about who couldn't. And here's where the little knife from the grave comes back, and it's the part the films drop. The figure standing over the king is Awash, yes, but she doesn't do it alone, and it isn't really about her being a woman. Just before the finish, Merry drives that elven dagger into the back of the Witch King's knee from behind, and because it's that blade, forged in the wars against Angmar to break the spells binding such wraiths, the stab doesn't just wound him, it unbinds him. The enchantment that has held him together and made him a terror for an age comes undone in that instant. Only then, with the creature unmade and buckling, does Awash drive her sword home. So the true version is a team effort, with an ancient, purpose-built weapon at the heart of it. You need the blade to break the protection, you need Merry's nerve to land it, and you need Awash's courage to finish. And the prophecy comes true, almost as an afterthought, because neither of them is a man. A hobbit and a woman, not by the hand of man, precisely as Glorfindel said, arriving by a route nobody could have planned. The films, for their part, boil all of that down to the exchange everyone remembers. You fool, no man can kill me, and Awash pulling off her helmet and saying, "I am no man," before finishing him. It's a magnificent fist pump of a moment, and I understand completely why they did it that way, because it plays to a full cinema like almost nothing else in the trilogy. But the book version is quieter and stranger, and for me, more satisfying, because it says the great undying terror of the age was undone by the two smallest, least likely people on the field, with a forgotten knife from a grave, in a moment that had been waiting an age to happen. Two people who were never meant to matter, mattering the most. I think about that one a lot. Gandalf dies. That's the thing people sometimes forget about the first film, because he comes back so completely. He falls in the mines with the Balrog, gone, and the whole fellowship is shattered by it. And then partway through the second story, there he is again, back on his feet, glowing white, more powerful than before. And the film's explanation is more or less, "I was sent back," which is lovely and mysterious, and if you're a casual viewer, completely unexamined. Sent back by whom? Sent back how? The film just lets a wizard be a wizard and trusts you not to ask. But there is an answer, and it lives up in the highest reaches of Tolkien's world, above all the kings and wizards and dark lords. There's a creator, Eru Ilúvatar, the one who made everything, and beneath him a set of godlike powers who sort of run the world on his behalf. Gandalf isn't a man, remember. He's one of a small order of these lesser powers, sent into the world in the body of an old man, specifically to help the free people stand against Esobluron. And when he dies fighting the Balrog, having spent everything, he's sent back to finish the job, returned and even upgraded, because the task wasn't done. It's about as close as the story ever comes to a direct act of the creator reaching in and adjusting things. And Tolkien, who was a devout Catholic, absolutely knew what he was doing with a death and a resurrection and a return in white. He's not subtle about it once you know to look, and he's completely invisible about it if you don't. Which leads neatly into the bigger, older complaint, the one people have been making forever. Why doesn't Gandalf just use his magic more? He's clearly enormously powerful. He throws down a Balrog. He breaks Ruman. Why is he mostly wandering about giving advice and setting off the occasional firework, when presumably he could be flattening armies? And the answer to that is one of my favourite quiet rules in the whole Legendarium, because it explains so much. The order Gandalf belongs to were sent into the world under strict limits. They were expressly forbidden from matching Ron with raw power, from trying to dominate the peoples of Middle-earth, or to force outcomes by sheer strength, even for good reasons. Their whole purpose was to guide, to counsel, to stir people into resisting on their own 2 feet. Because the entire moral spine of the story is that you don't beat a would-be tyrant by becoming a bigger one. The temptation of the ring is exactly the temptation to fix everything by force, and Gandalf knows that if he gave into that, even to do good, he'd just become a new Dark Lord in a nicer hat. That's why, when Frodo tries to give him the ring early on, he recoils from it in genuine fear. He knows himself. He knows he'd start with pity and end with tyranny, so he keeps his sleeves rolled down on purpose. His restraint isn't a plot convenience to stop him solving everything in Act 1. It's the point of what he is. The strongest character on the good side spends the whole story deliberately not using most of his strength. And understanding why is understanding the whole thing. Since we've just mentioned the Balrog, let's stay down in the dark for a bit, because there's a question about it that has caused more cheerful arguing on the internet than almost anything else in Tolkien. And it is gloriously low stakes. It's this: does the Balrog have wings? And if it has wings, can it fly? And if it can fly, then, well, you can see where this is going. Picture the scene. The Fellowship are running through the endless black halls of More, this vast ruined dwarf city carved down into the roots of a mountain. And there are drums somewhere below them, a deep booming that gets closer. And then this thing arrives. A creature of shadow and flame. huge, wreathed in darkness, with fire streaming off it. And in the book, the description does this maddening thing. It says the shadow around it reached out like two vast wings. Like two vast wings, not it had two vast wings. Like, and then a moment later, it says the shadow spread from wall to wall, which sounds even more wingish. So for decades, people have gone back and forth. Is that shadow just shaped like wings for dramatic effect, the way you describe a cloak billowing? Or does the thing literally have great flaming wings folded on its back? And the reason anyone cares, beyond the sheer fun of it, is the follow-on question. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, Gandalf says, "You cannot pass," breaks the bridge under the Balrog, and the Balrog falls into the abyss, dragging Gandalf with it by the whip. And if the Balrog could fly, people ask, why did it fall? Why didn't it just spread those wings and glide back up and carry on being terrifying, instead of plummeting into the dark like a dropped anvil? I have to tell you, I don't think there's a clean answer, and I've made my peace with that. And I'd gently suggest you do too, because it's a wonderful thing to not know. The most sensible reading, for me, is that the wings are mostly shadow and menace, an effect of the darkness it carries around itself, rather than functional flight equipment. It's a being of fire and shadow. The shadow does dramatic things. It reaches out, it spreads, it looms. That doesn't mean the creature is aerodynamic. And even if there are wings under there, in some sense, a thing that heavy and that wreathed in its own dark might not be able to just casually take off in a collapsing underground hall, especially after being caught by a wizard on a breaking bridge. Falling into a chasm tends to happen faster than a debate about wingspan. The films, for what it's worth, sort of split the difference. The Balrog you see on screen clearly has these massive shadowy wing shapes, but it never flies, and nobody in the film pretends it could. It falls and it stays fallen, and then much later, Gandalf tells us the two of them ended up fighting all the way down to some underground lake, and then all the way back up the inside of the mountain, which is one of the great off-screen adventures in the whole story, and honestly deserves its own film. But the wing question itself. No, I'm not solving it tonight, and I don't want to. It's one of those things that exists purely to be turned over slowly in the small hours. Wings or shadow shaped like wings. Both readings are supported by the text. Both have been argued at enormous length by people far more devoted than me, and the beauty of it is that Tolkien probably wasn't being precise because he was writing atmosphere, not a technical manual. He wanted the moment to feel enormous and dark and final, and it does. The exact mechanics of the thing's shoulder blades were not, I suspect, keeping him up at night, which is a bit ironic, given how many nights they've kept the rest of us up. Early on, before the Fellowship even forms, there's a chase. Frodo has been stabbed with a cursed blade, and he's fading, and he's being carried toward Aravi Endel with the ring wraiths closing in, those hooded black riders who serve SOW Ron and hunt the ring. And they nearly get him at a river crossing, a ford, and then the water rises up in a great flood, horses and foam shaped almost like charging steeds, and it sweeps the riders' black horses and their bodies away for a time. And you might reasonably wonder, why does that stop them? These are the most frightening creatures in the early story. They're undead kings, they can't really be killed by ordinary means. They radiate dread, and they get beaten by a river having a moment. The films make a change here that's worth flagging, because it's one of the better known swaps. In the book, the person who gets Frodo to the ford is an elf lord called Glorfindel, who is powerful and ancient, and frankly, doesn't get to do much else, because he's cut from the films. In the film, that whole role is handed to Arwen, who rides Frodo to the water, and does the flood herself, which gives her something heroic to do early, and folds a minor character's job into a major one. It's a sensible film decision. It just means that if you read the book after seeing the film, you meet this Glorfindel chap and wonder who took his big scene. But the actual question, Why water? Why fire? Why are these terrors undone by such specific things? That's genuinely interesting. The ring wraiths have a strange collection of weaknesses for creatures so fearsome. Running water troubles them, fire keeps them back, and oddly, names. There's a moment where a character mentions that the most effective thing done against one of them was not a sword at all, but the name of Elbereth, one of the holy powers, spoken aloud, which hurt the creature more than the blade did. In fact, the blade that struck it was destroyed, and the blade left the deeper wound. I find that detail wonderful. These aren't things you fight with strength. They're things held together by Ron's will and by dark enchantment. And what unpicks them is not force, but a kind of purity, water, flame, and holy names, the clean things that their whole cursed existence is set against. So the flood at the ford isn't just a river being lucky. It's the natural world, stirred up by someone with the power to stir it, throwing one of its clean forces at creatures who exist in defiance of clean things. Why exactly running water in particular gets under their skin, the story never spells out with a rulebook, and I'm glad, because a rulebook would ruin it. It's enough to know that the wraiths, for all their dread, are brittle in odd places, and that the world itself keeps finding those places. A cursed king brought up short by a stream. There's something almost funny in it, and something a bit beautiful too. The very first thing you hear in the films is Galadriel's voice, calm and sad, telling you the history of the ring. And there's a line in there that has always tickled me, because it isn't quite true. She says that after the ring was lost, it passed out of all knowledge, and that history became legend, and legend became myth, and for 2,500 years, the ring passed out of all knowledge. It's gorgeous narration. It sets the whole mood. It's also, if you take it literally, a bit of a fib, because the ring didn't pass out of all knowledge. Plenty of people knew it existed. The wise knew. The elves remembered it perfectly well. Ruman, the head of the wizards, had made a lengthy study of the rings of power and knew a great deal about the One Ring specifically. Gandalf knew the history. The whole reason the story can happen is that when Bilbo's odd little magic ring surfaces, there are people alive who know exactly what it might be and how to check. What was actually true is that the ring was lost, its location unknown, and many assumed it was gone for good, at the bottom of a river forever. That's very different from nobody knowing it ever existed. The knowledge was there. The ring itself had just gone missing. So it's poetic license, and I don't really mind it, because that's what an opening narration is for. It's setting a feeling, not filing a report. Galadriel is giving you the emotional truth, that the ring had faded into old stories and nobody was worrying about it, rather than the literal truth, that a handful of very well-informed people could have told you all about it. If she opened the film with, "The ring was lost, but remained a subject of ongoing scholarly interest among the learned," you'd have turned it off. Sometimes a story rounds the facts off for the sake of the mood, and that's allowed. There's a related thing that lives in the books and gets quietly skipped in the films, and it's a proper little wrinkle in the timeline. When Bilbo leaves the ring to Frodo, Gandalf already suspects something is off about it, but he doesn't immediately know it's the One Ring. And rather than racing back to confirm it, he goes away, and he's gone for years. In the book's timeline, something like 17 years pass between Bilbo's departure and Gandalf coming back to actually test the ring and be sure. Frodo just sort of has the most dangerous object in the world, sitting in a drawer in the Shire for the better part of 2 decades, while Gandalf follows up other leads. And then Gandalf finally returns, throws the ring in Frodo's fire, and reads the hidden letters that appear in the heat and confirms it. Now the films compress all of that down to what feels like an afternoon, because all those years of a hobbit tending his garden is not gripping cinema, but it does mean that, in the book, the wisest person around took the better part of a generation to check the single most important fact in the story. You can defend it, Gandalf was busy, he wasn't certain, he was chasing Goal, and reading old scrolls, and trying not to raise an alarm before he had to. Being wrong about this out loud would have been catastrophic, so he wanted to be sure. But there is a version of events where he's a touch more urgent about it, and the whole thing gets resolved a decade and a half sooner. I think about that quiet drawer in the Shire sometimes, the ring just waiting patiently in the dark, while ordinary hobbit life carried on around it, none of them having the faintest idea. There's something almost peaceful about it, which is a strange thing to say about the most dangerous object in the world. Here's one that only really jumps out when you line the characters up next to each other, and once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. The ring corrupts people at wildly different speeds, and it's not obvious why. Take Bilbo. He had the ring for around 60 years. He found it in Gollum's cave, popped it in his pocket, and then went home, and lived a long, comfortable, mostly cheerful life in the Shire with it the whole time. Yes, it kept him from aging, and yes, by the end, there's a nervy, possessive edge to him, that flash of something ugly when he doesn't want to let it go. But all that time, and he's basically still Bilbo. He's not a wraith, he's not a monster, he's just an old hobbit who got a bit odd about a piece of jewellery. Then look at Frodo. In the movies, Frodo has it for a matter of months, and it grinds him down almost to nothing. By the end, he can barely function. He's hollowed out, he hears it, he feels its weight physically, and when he finally reaches the fire, he can't give it up at all. Months, and it nearly destroys him. Then there's Sam, who carries the ring for a very short stretch when he thinks Frodo is dead, and it does try its trick on him, shows him a grand vision of himself as a great hero remaking the world into a garden. And Sam just sort of shrugs it off and hands it straight back. And then poor Boromir, who only briefly and accidentally holds the thing, who just spends a few weeks near it, and it gets so deep into him that he tries to take it by force, and it more or less costs him everything. So what's going on? Why an easy stretch of decades for one hobbit, and a few devastating months for another, and near-instant obsession for a man who never touches it? And the answer is a mix of things, none of which is stated as a hard rule, which is why it feels inconsistent until you think about it. Part of it is proximity to Mordor. The closer the ring gets to the heart of SOW Ron's power, the heavier and more awake it becomes. Bilbo had it in a quiet corner of the world, with the Dark Lord dormant and far away. Frodo carried it straight into the shadow, walking it closer and closer to the source, and it woke up and fought back harder with every mile. Part of it is what the ring senses it can get. It plays on ambition, on the desire for power, and it pushes hardest on the people with the most to grab. Boromir is a proud warrior son of a failing kingdom who desperately wants to save his people, so the ring has an enormous hold on his heart. Sam wants a nice garden and for his friend to be all right, so the ring reaches for him and finds almost nothing to hold on to. And part of it, honestly, is just hobbits. Tolkien clearly thought there was something in ordinary, humble, unambitious folk that made them more resistant to exactly this kind of temptation. And that's the whole reason the fate of the world gets handed to them rather than to kings. So it's not really a plot hole, it's a sliding scale. And the scale is set by where you are, who you are, and how much you want. The ring is a mirror that shows you the thing you most desire, and then charges you everything for it. If you don't desire much, it's oddly cheap. If you desire a great deal, it takes the lot. Bilbo wanted a quiet life, so it let him keep one, mostly. That's almost gentle, in a horrible way. This one is squarely a film thing, and it's one of the changes that book readers get most tender about, so let me try to be fair to everyone. In the second film, there's a stretch where Sam actually says, out loud, "By rights, we shouldn't even be here." And he's completely correct in a way the film maybe didn't intend, because in the book, this whole sequence doesn't happen. Here's the situation. Frodo and Sam, on their way to Mordor, get caught by Fair Ymir, who is a captain of Gondor, and the younger brother of Bor-Omir, the man who tried to take the ring earlier. In the book, Fair Ymir works out that these hobbits are carrying something enormous and dangerous, and he passes the test. His brother failed. He says, more or less, that he wouldn't pick this thing up if he found it lying in the road, that he has no interest in it whatsoever. He's a genuinely noble man, and he lets them go on their way. And that's a beautiful and important beat, because it shows you that not everyone the ring meets falls to it. The films change this. Jackson decided that having a character just be immune to the ring's pull deflated the tension. That if the ring is this overwhelming temptation, then everyone ought to feel it. So Fair Ymir is tempted. He decides to drag Frodo and Sam and the ring all the way to the ruined city of Osgiliath and hand the whole prize over to his father. And this creates a genuinely odd sequence, because at Osgiliath, while the place is under attack, Frodo, half out of his mind from the ring's influence, wanders up onto a high point and holds the ring out toward one of the winged ring wraiths, in plain view, basically offering it to the enemy. Sam tackles him out of the way at the last second, and this is where the plot hole opens up, and it's a real one. The single most important goal the ring wraiths have, the entire reason they exist, is to recover the ring for SOW Ron. And here is a ring wraith, right there, with the ring being physically held up toward it by a dazed hobbit on a rooftop. And it leaves. It gets startled off and flies away and gives up the one thing it wants most in the world. Fans have tried to explain it, that maybe the winged beast got hurt and bolted, that maybe the wraith didn't quite register what it was seeing. But honestly, the sight of a ring wraith abandoning a clear shot at the ring is hard to square with everything else. We're told about how desperately they hunt it, and there's a second problem stacked on top. The main thing this detour actually accomplishes, in story terms, is that it reveals to a servant of SO Ron that Frodo, a hobbit, is the one carrying the ring, which is precisely the secret. The entire plan depends on keeping. Gandalf and Aragorn spend the rest of the story trying to convince SO Ron that some great warrior has the ring, to keep his eye off the little person actually carrying it. And here's a film scene that risks blowing that cover for no real gain. Then, having nearly caused a catastrophe, Fair Ymir simply changes his mind and lets them go anyway, which lands them roughly where the book had them all along, just with a detour and a near disaster in between. I don't hate the change as much as some people do, because I understand the instincts behind it. Jackson wanted the ring to feel dangerous to everyone, but it's a clear case of a plot hole that only exists because a character was rewritten. Book Fair. Ymir creates no problem at all because he's simply good, and the story trusts you to find that moving rather than boring. Fair Ymir creates a whole tangle of logic that then has to be quietly untangled so the plot can get back on track. Sometimes the noble, undramatic version is the better one, and this is one of those times. By rights, as Sam says, they really shouldn't have been there. Right, let's talk about the Ghost Army, because this is the film change that I think causes the most, of any single moment in the whole trilogy. In the third film, Aragorn goes up into a haunted mountain and recruits an army of cursed dead soldiers, glowing green, unkillable because they're already dead, bound by an old oath they never fulfilled. And he brings them to the great battle at Minas Tirith, and they pour through the enemy like a green tide and win the entire thing, more or less single-handedly. They sweep the field. Nothing can touch them. It's spectacular. And then Aragorn releases them from their oath and lets them go. And every single person watching has the same thought at the same moment, which is, why? Why would you let them go? You had an invincible, unkillable, undefeatable army of ghosts, and there's still an enormous final battle to fight at the Black Gate, and you just dismiss them. Keep the ghosts, use the ghosts for everything. march the ghosts up to Emor Door and have them stroll in and win the war on Tuesday. It is, on the face of it, one of the most baffling tactical decisions in the story. The catch, though, is that this is almost entirely a problem the film created for itself, and the book handles it much more carefully. In the book, the Dead Army is far less of a wonder weapon. Aragorn takes them, yes, but their main job is much smaller and cleverer. There's a fleet of enemy ships, corsairs, sailing up the river to reinforce Esso-Ron's side, and the dead are used mainly to terrify the crews of those ships into abandoning them. The dead don't cut through the great battle like a lawnmower. What actually happens is that Aragorn frees up those captured ships, releases the dead from their oath because their task is done, and then arrives at the battle with a fresh army of living men from the southern parts of Gondor, sailing in on the ships everyone assumed were full of enemies. The turning point is living reinforcements arriving from an unexpected direction, not a horde of unstoppable ghosts. So in the book, there's no plot hole, because the dead were never a magic win button. They were a bit of psychological warfare to seize a fleet, and then they were dismissed the moment they'd done that one specific job exactly as the deal required. It's the film that turns them into a green army that flattens everything, and once you've shown an audience an unstoppable force winning a battle in 10 seconds, you cannot then have that force politely excuse itself before the next, even bigger battle, without everyone squinting at the screen. If you want to defend the film on its own terms, and I'm always happy to try, the best you can do is this. Aragorn made a bargain. The dead were bound by an oath, and the terms were that once they fought for him and fulfilled the oath, they'd be released and finally allowed to rest. Keeping them enslaved past that point, dragging a cursed army around indefinitely to do your fighting, is exactly the kind of thing a good king doesn't do. There's a moral argument that the whole point of Aragorn is that he's the sort of person who lets the dead rest when he's promised to, even when it's tactically inconvenient. And I quite like that reading. It makes the release a character moment rather than a blunder, but I won't pretend it fully answers the practical objection, because the practical objection is a good one, and it exists purely because the film made the ghosts too good at their job. Some plot holes you dig for yourself by being too impressive in the previous scene. There's a sequence in the third film that gets voted one of the most beautiful things in the whole trilogy, and I completely agree with that, and it's also built on a premise that the book doesn't really support. The beacons. You've got these great signal fires strung across the tops of the mountains between Gondor and Rohan, and when the first one is lit, the camera goes leaping from peak to snowy peak, one flaring up after another across this vast landscape, with the music swelling underneath. It gives me chills every time. As pure filmmaking, it's just about perfect. The story reason for it, though, is a bit invented. In the film, the setup is that Den, Thor, the steward ruling Gondor, has more or less given up. He's sunk in despair and pride, and he refuses to light the beacons and call Rohan for help, because he doesn't want to admit Gondor needs saving, or he resents the idea of the king returning, depending on how you read his mood. So Gandalf has to sneak Pippin, the little hobbit, up the tower to secretly light the first beacon behind Den Thor's back. And only then does the chain of fires race across the mountains and bring the horsemen of Rohan riding to the rescue. It's dramatic, and it gives Pippin something brave to do, and it paints Den Thor as a man whose failure nearly dooms everyone. But in the book, it doesn't work like that at all. Den Thor, for all his flaws, and he has serious ones, is not too proud to call for aid. He sends for Rohan properly, by messenger, with a traditional token, an arrow, the recognised sign that Gondor is calling in an old alliance. The beacons in the book are lit as a matter of course, part of the normal machinery of a kingdom at war, signalling that it's under threat. There's no secret midnight mission, no hobbit sneaking past a mad steward. The system just works the way a system is supposed to. So the film invents a whole conflict, Den, Thor, refusing and needing to be worked around, in order to turn a routine signal into a nail-biting act of rebellion. I genuinely don't mind this one, and here's why. The change makes film Den, Thor a more active obstacle, which gives the good characters something to push against, and it produces that unforgettable sequence of the fires leaping across the peaks. But it does mean film Den, Thor is a meaner, smaller figure than book Den, Thor, who is a genuinely tragic man, a wise and capable ruler, slowly broken by grief and by despair. And the despair itself in the book has a specific cause that the films only lightly touch. Den, Thor has been secretly using one of the Seeing Stones, a palantir, to spy on the enemy, and Ron has been feeding him carefully chosen visions of overwhelming doom through it, deliberately crushing his hope. So the book's Den, Thor isn't just a proud man in a strop. He's a clever man who's been psychologically poisoned by looking into a device the enemy controls, shown just enough truth to make him believe all is lost. That's a far sadder and more interesting reason to give up than mere stubbornness. The film keeps the collapse and trims most of the reason for it, and so the beacons have to be lit in secret to root around a character who, in the original, would simply have lit them himself. Let's slow right down for this one, which feels appropriate because it's about the slowest characters in the entire story. The Ents, the giant tree herders of Fangorn Forest, ancient beings who look like walking trees, led by the oldest of them, Treebeard, whose whole philosophy is more or less, don't be hasty. They speak slowly. They think slowly. A conversation among Ents can take days because in their language it's rude to say anything that takes less time than the thing is worth. And to them most things are worth quite a lot of time. Two of the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, end up among the Ents after escaping some orcs, and they eventually help stir the Ents into action against Ruman, the wizard who's turned traitor and set up a war machine in a place called Isengard, ripping up the forest to fuel his furnaces. And when the Ents finally move, they're devastating. They march on Isengard, tear the place apart, break the dams, and flood the whole industrial pit in what feels like an afternoon. Ruman, who's been such a looming threat, is suddenly just trapped in his tower, looking down at his ruined empire, undone by a bunch of angry trees. And this raises two gentle questions. The first is, if the Ents could beat Ruman that easily, why on earth did they wait so long? Ruman had been chopping down their forest for ages. Why not act years earlier, before he got so strong? And the honest answer is that it's their entire nature. The Ents are not warlike. They're gardeners and shepherds on a scale of centuries. Going to war is a colossal, almost unthinkable thing for them, a genuine breaking of who they are. It takes the direct sight of the destruction, the felled trees, the wasteland Ruman's made, to finally rouse them, and even then they have to talk it through for days first. Their slowness isn't a flaw in the plot, it's the point of them. They represent the old, patient, natural world, which is terribly hard to provoke and terrifying once provoked. The tragedy is that it took this much to move them at all. The second question is a film-only thing. In the films, the Ents actually decide, after all their deliberating, not to go to war. They conclude it isn't their fight. And then Pippin cleverly asks Treebeard to carry them off in a particular direction, south, toward Isengard, so that Treebeard sees for himself the swathe of forest Ruman has cut down and burned right on his own doorstep. And the sight of it enrages him on the spot, and off they go to war after all. Some book readers grumble about this, because in the book the Ents decide to march after their long council, more on principle, without needing to be tricked into taking the scenic route past the damage. I actually think the film's version is rather good. It's more emotionally direct. You watch a slow, peaceful old being turn a corner, see his home destroyed, and feel something break in him. It gets to the same place by a slightly more manipulated path, but the destination, ancient nature rising up in fury against industry and greed, is pure Tolkien either way. And the flooding of Isengard, the water pouring in and drowning all those wheels and pits and fires, is one of the most satisfying things in the trilogy, precisely because it's the slow, patient green world finally saying, enough. Here's a fun detail that a lot of people never learn, because the story is very good at making you forget it. There were 5 wizards, 5, and the whole enormous tale across all those hours really only concerns itself with 2 of them. The wizards, the order Gandalf belongs to, were sent into the world specifically to help against SOW, as we touched on earlier. And there were 5 sent. There's Gandalf the Grey, who becomes Gandalf the White, the one the whole thing revolves around. There's SAH Ruman the White, the head of the Order, who studies power a little too closely and ends up corrupted by his own ambition and by the enemy, becoming one of the main villains. So far so central. Those 2 carry the plot between them. But then there are 3 more, and this is where it gets pleasingly strange. There's Rad, Ghast the Brown, who does turn up briefly. He's the wizard who cares about animals and plants, who lives out in the wild, among the birds and the beasts, and who, depending on how you read it, either gets so absorbed in the natural world that he rather loses sight of the big mission, or simply finds his own quiet way of serving it by looking after living things. Gandalf uses him at one point, more or less as an unwitting messenger, to summon help, and then he sort of drifts out of the story, off with his birds, never to be seen again. He's not a villain, and he's not exactly a hero. He's a wizard who wandered off to do his own gentle thing, and the War of the Ring mostly happens without him. And then there are the 2 nobody can quite account for, the 2 blue wizards. And I love these 2 precisely because they are the biggest loose thread in the whole legendarium. They were sent off into the far east and south of the world, into the vast regions the story never shows you, the lands under Sauron's shadow that are always just off the edge of the map. And what happened to them, Tolkien genuinely never settled. He wrote more than one account. In some versions he seems to suggest they failed, that they fell into corruption out there, maybe even founded cults or dark magic traditions of their own, which would make them a quiet tragedy. 2 of the good guys lost in the dark where nobody was watching. In other, later musings, he softens it and suggests they might have done important work stirring up resistance against Sauron in the east, weakening his forces in ways that never get seen on the page, but that mattered enormously. He simply never made up his mind and never wrote their story properly, and so they hang there forever. 2 wizards sent to save the world, who walked off into the unknown and were never resolved. I find that genuinely haunting, in a nice way, the kind of thing that's lovely to lie in the dark and wonder about. 3/5 of the wizards sent to help are functionally absent from the story that needed them. 1's off communing with hedgehogs, and 2 have vanished into the east on an errand the author himself couldn't decide the ending of. And it doesn't feel like a mistake, oddly. It feels like the world being bigger than the story, because that's the thing about Middle-earth. The bits we get to watch, the ring, the fellowship, the walk to the mountain, is just one small corner of something far bigger. And off at the edges, out of frame, there are 2 blue-robed figures having an entire epic of their own that we'll never get to read. Maybe that's better than an answer. I've decided it is, at least for tonight. Some errands are more interesting when you never find out how they ended. There's a line that's become so famous, it's basically escaped the film entirely and lives on its own now. One does not simply walk into Mordor. Bor O'Meara says it at the council, explaining that the Black Gate is guarded by more than just orcs, that there's a great watchful eye, that the very air is a poisonous fume, and that it is folly to think you can just stroll in. And it's a great line, and it's completely true about the front door. And then the actual story proceeds to have two hobbits, more or less, simply walk into Emoar, just not through the front. This is one of those things that only really bothers you if you go looking, but once you've seen it, you do smile at it. The Black Gate, the main entrance, is exactly as advertised, impregnable. Armies out front, an enormous wall, the whole thing. Frodo and Sam take one look at it and immediately realise there's no getting through there. So instead, they go the back way, guided by Goll up a hidden stair and through a high mountain pass. And the odd thing is, how much easier the back way turns out to be than the front way's reputation would suggest. The secret path is guarded technically, but the guard is of all things a giant spider. That's Shelob, an ancient monstrous spider who lives in a lightless tunnel on the pass, and she's genuinely terrifying, and the encounter with her is one of the scariest bits of the whole story. But think about it as border security for the single most important frontier in the world. Ron's great weakness, the one route by which his enemies could sneak the ring to his doorstep. And his defense for it is essentially a big spider who lives there anyway and eats whatever wanders in. He doesn't post soldiers on the pass. He relies on a creature who isn't even really working for him, who just happens to make that route deadly by existing there. Goll knows he can guide the hobbits undetected through what turns out to be a virtually unguarded way in, because the guard is a monster, not a garrison. And then once you're actually inside Mordor, there's another thing that quietly helps our heroes far more than it should, which is that the orcs are frequently at each other's throats. At one point, Frodo and Sam are only saved because an entire tower's worth of orcs falls to squabbling and fighting among themselves over loot, and more or less wipe each other out, leaving the way clear. Sauron's forces are enormous and frightening in the mass, but as individuals they're spiteful, greedy, cowardly, and quick to turn on one another the moment there's no one making them behave, which means the inside of the enemy's fortress is a good deal more chaotic and porous than the terrifying outside would ever lead you to believe. So the real picture is a bit funny when you hold it up to the light. Yes, one does not simply walk into Mordor, if by walking you mean march an army through the main gate. But two small, quiet, unremarkable people going the back way, past a spider, through a squabbling rabble, absolutely can and do. And that ties right back to Ron's blind spot from earlier. The way he guards against the great and powerful, coming to seize his throne, and never imagines the small and humble slipping in to undo it. The front door is built to stop a king. It was never built to stop a gardener and his friend with a spider between them and the fire. This is my favourite kind of plot hole, because it isn't really a hole in the story at all. It's a hole in the history of the story, a scene where you can see the author going back and stitching over something he'd already published. And it involves the single most important object in the whole tale, the ring, and the moment Bilbo first gets his hands on it. So, in The Hobbit, the book that came before all of this, there's a chapter where Bilbo is lost in the dark under the mountains, and he stumbles across Goll, and the two of them play a game of riddles with Bilbo's life as the stakes. And in the original version of The Hobbit, the one first published in the 1930s, when Bilbo wins the riddle game, Goll is perfectly pleasant about it. Goll had promised Bilbo a present for winning, and the present was going to be his magic ring. And Goll goes looking for it and can't find it, because unbeknownst to him, Bilbo has already picked it up off the floor. And Goll is genuinely apologetic, embarrassed even, and to make up for losing the promised gift, he shows Bilbo the way out instead. It's a fairly cheerful little scene. Goll is a sad, odd creature, but he's not monstrous. And the ring is just a nice magic ring that turns you invisible, nothing sinister about it. Now hold that next to what the ring later became. By the time Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings, the ring had grown in his imagination into the One Ring, this dreadful thing that corrupts everyone who holds it, that Gollum would kill for, that has warped him over centuries into a wretched shell, utterly obsessed with it. And that new version of the ring is completely incompatible with a Goal who would cheerfully offer it up as a party prize for winning a riddle game. No one who owned the One Ring would ever give it away as a gift. The whole point of the thing is that you find it agonizingly hard to let go of it. So Tolkien did something rather sneaky and rather brilliant. He went back and revised the chapter in The Hobbit. In the new version, the one everyone reads now, the riddle game is much darker. Gollum isn't playing for a present. He's playing for whether or not he gets to eat Bilbo. And he has no intention of giving up the ring, because he's already secretly planning to use it to sneak up on Bilbo and kill him. It's only when he goes to fetch it and realises with horror that it's gone, that Bilbo must have it, that the scene turns into the desperate, murderous, grief-stricken thing it is in the later telling. It matches the One Ring perfectly. And then, because Tolkien was clever, he built the discrepancy into the story itself. He decided that the original, nicer version wasn't a mistake by the author at all. It was a lie told by Bilbo. In the fiction, Bilbo wrote down the false, cheerful version in his own memoirs because the ring was already working on him, making him feel guilty and defensive about how he'd really got it. So he invented a more respectable story where it was a freely given gift. And Gandalf, in The Lord of the Rings, actually notices that Bilbo's account doesn't quite ring true, and it's one of the early clues that something is deeply wrong with this ring and with what it's doing to the person who holds it. So a genuine authorial revision, a case of an author changing his mind after publishing, got folded into the story as evidence of the ring's corrupting power. The plot hole became a plot point. I think that's just wonderful. He turned his own edit into a lie told by a character and made the lie meaningful. You almost never get to see the join like that, and here the join is the whole thing. This one is less a plot hole and more a genuine unresolved knot, one that troubled Tolkien himself for the rest of his life. And I find it the most quietly serious question in the whole legendarium. Where do the orcs come from? And underneath that, the much harder question: can an orc be redeemed? In the films, orcs are simple. They're the Horde. They're evil, they're expendable. You cheer when they're cut down in their thousands, and nobody asks any awkward questions about it. And for a film, that works fine. But Tolkien, who was a deeply religious man and thought carefully about these things, tied himself in knots over it because his own beliefs made the easy answer impossible. He didn't believe any thinking, speaking, living being could be created purely evil, beyond all hope of goodness. In his world, the great enemy, Morgoth, the dark power who came before SOW Ron, could not actually make life. He could only twist and corrupt things that already existed. So where did the orcs come from? What did he twist to make them? And the most common answer Tolkien reached for, though he never fully committed to it, is genuinely disturbing. That the orcs were originally elves. That in the deep past Morgoth captured elves, the fairest and most gifted of all the peoples, and tortured and corrupted and bred them over long ages into the twisted, cruel, suffering creatures the orcs became. Which is a horrible idea, but it does explain a lot. It explains why orcs can talk and scheme and make things, and even show flickers of loyalty or resentment or fear among themselves. They're not animals, they're people, broken on purpose. But here's where the knot pulls tight, and here's why Tolkien could never quite finish the thought. If orcs were made from elves, and elves have immortal souls that go on after death, then what happens to an orc when it dies? Does it go where elves go? Can it be released, healed, redeemed somehow? And if orcs are, at bottom, ruined people rather than evil animals, then the heroes of the story spend a great deal of time gleefully slaughtering thousands of beings who never chose to be what they are, who were made monstrous by torture generations before they were born. That's a much more uncomfortable story than the one the films tell, and Tolkien knew it. He wrote about it, he worried at it, he tried different origins, and he never landed on a version he was happy with. He disliked the idea that any race could be wholly beyond salvation, but he built a world that seemed to require exactly that, and the contradiction just sat there. Some readers have suggested a gentler reading, that maybe individual orcs might have had some sliver of a chance, but that the vast majority were simply too far gone, too deep in Morgoth's making, to find their way back. Others think the orcs lost whatever they'd been made from entirely, and became something new and hollow, but there's no official answer because their author never gave one, because he genuinely didn't know, and I think there's something oddly moving about that. The man who invented the whole world couldn't bring himself to decide whether its monsters were beyond mercy. He left the door open a crack because he couldn't bear to shut it. It's the kind of thing that turns a simple adventure into something that keeps you thinking long after the adventure's over. Not a plot hole exactly, a moral question the story asks and then honestly admits it can't answer. Let's talk about Aragorn, and specifically about the strange fact that Gondor, this great kingdom, spent nearly 1,000 years without a king on the throne, being run instead by a series of stewards, caretakers, who kept insisting they were just holding the chair warm for a king who might one day return. And meanwhile, Aragorn, the actual rightful heir to that throne, spent most of the story wandering around in the wilderness in a muddy cloak, going by a nickname, letting people think he was just a scruffy ranger. And you might reasonably ask why. Why the enormous delay? Why leave the throne empty for so long? And why does the true king spend so long pretending to be a nobody? The steward situation actually has a fairly neat in-world explanation, and I rather like it. The line of kings in Gondor simply ran out. The last king rode off to fight the Witch King, of all people, centuries earlier, and never came back, and left no heir. So the ruling stewards, a noble family, took over the day-to-day governing, but they never dared to actually claim the crown for themselves, because they weren't of the royal blood, and the whole legitimacy of Gondor rested on the idea that the true kingly line might return one day. So they governed in the king's name, generation after generation, sitting on a lesser chair at the foot of the empty throne, in this odd state of permanent placeholder. It's a lovely bit of world building, actually. A kingdom too proud and too tradition-bound to crown a new line, waiting so long for a return that most people had long stopped believing in. Aragorn's own reluctance is the more interesting bit, and the books and films handle it a little differently. Film Aragorn is quite consciously written as a man who doubts himself, who's afraid of the throne, afraid he carries the same weakness as his ancestor Isildur, the one who kept the ring at the crack of doom all those years ago. So film Aragorn hangs back, avoids his destiny, and has to grow into accepting it over the 3 films. Book Aragorn is much more settled about who he is from the start. He knows he's the heir, he's been quietly preparing for it for decades, and his hanging back is more strategic than fearful. He can't just march up to Gondor and announce himself, because he needs the moment to be right. He needs to prove himself, and above all, he can't press his claim in a way that would fracture the alliance against SOW Ron at exactly the wrong time. But here's the part that surprises people, and it connects to something we talked about earlier with the corruption of the ring. There's a reason the rightful king spends the story as a ranger in the weeds rather than swanning about in a crown. Númenórean blood, the old royal blood Aragorn carries, comes with a very long life. He's far older than he looks. He's already lived the better part of a normal man's several lifetimes by the time the story starts, quietly serving, fighting in disguise in far-off wars, learning, waiting. So the image of Aragorn as a young man stepping up to his destiny is a bit misleading. He's an ancient, patient, deeply experienced figure who's been getting ready for this his entire unusually long life, and who understands that a crown seized at the wrong moment is worth nothing, but a crown claimed at exactly the right moment, when he arrives to save the city with an army nobody expected, can rally an entire people, The 1,000-year wait and the ranger's disguise aren't loose ends. They're a very long game, being played by someone with the lifespan to play it. We mentioned the Seeing Stones earlier, when Den, a Thor, was quietly being driven to despair by one of them, so let's give them a proper little section of their own, because they're one of the more elegant bits of the world, and they also produce one of the great "Oh Pippin" no moments in the whole story. The Seeing Stones, the Palantiri, are these dark crystal globes made long ago, back in the days of the old kingdoms. There were several of them, scattered across the lands, and they worked as a kind of network. If you had the strength of will to master one, you could look into it and see far-off places, and even communicate with someone gazing into another stone somewhere else. They were tools of kings, a way to hold a scattered realm together, to see what was happening at the borders, to talk across great distances. A genuinely useful and rather beautiful piece of old technology, if you want to call ancient magical crystal balls technology. The trouble is that SOW Ron got hold of one of them, and once he had one stone in the network, everything changed. Because anyone else who looked into any of the other stones risked their gaze being caught and dragged to his. And here's the clever, sinister part. The stones don't lie exactly. What SOW Ron does is worse than lying. He shows you real things, true images, but he chooses which true things you see and arranges them to lead you to false conclusions. That's how he broke Den U Thor. He didn't feed the steward comforting lies. He fed him carefully selected truths, real glimpses of the overwhelming forces gathering against Gondor, until a wise and capable man became convinced that all hope was gone. Truth used as a weapon. I find that far more frightening than simple deception. And this is where poor Pippin comes in. S.H. Ruman had one of these stones up in his tower, and after S.H. Ruman's defeat, it comes into the group's possession, and Gandalf, who understands exactly how dangerous it is, keeps it wrapped up and warns everyone to leave it well alone. And Pippin, being Pippin, young and curious and utterly unable to resist a mysterious glowing object, sneaks it away in the night, while everyone's asleep, and looks into it. And of course Sauron is on the other end. Pippin gets caught in the stone, and it's genuinely awful. He's paralysed, tormented, nearly broken by it. Gandalf gets there in time to pull him out, and afterwards he says something I always remember, about how perilous the devices of an art deeper than our own can be, and it turns out to be a rare stroke of luck dressed as a disaster, because Ron, seeing a hobbit in the stone, jumps to the wrong conclusion. He assumes Eshart Ruman has captured the ring bearer, and that misreading actually helps the good side more than it hurts them. Now the little inconsistency the sharp-eyed have pointed out here is a nice one. Gandalf is so careful, so grave, about warning people away from the Seeing Stone, treating it as this uniquely perilous device. And yet the same Gandalf hands back all sorts of other powerful enchanted elvish objects to the hobbits without a word of warning. Glowing swords, a phial of captured starlight, magical cloaks and ropes and waybread, gifts from Galadriel herself. Never a caution about any of those. So why the special dread about the stone? And the fair answer is probably that the stone is a device in a way the gifts aren't. The gifts are blessings, made with good intent, safe to use. The stone is a channel, a two-way door, and the danger isn't the object itself, but what might be waiting on the other end of it looking back at you. A cloak can't be corrupted against you. A window can, if something terrible is standing at the far window. Gandalf wasn't warning about magic, he was warning about who might be watching through it, which, when you think about how much of the modern world is glowing rectangles we stare into, that also stare back, is a surprisingly current thing for an old wizard to have worried about. Here's a question that isn't usually filed under plot holes, but absolutely belongs in a night like this, because it's the sort of thing that seems simple and then unravels the more you pull at it. At the very end, at the crack of doom, the exact place where the whole quest was always heading. Frodo stands over the fire, ready to throw the ring in and finish it. And he doesn't. He can't. He puts it on his finger instead and claims it for his own. After everything, after all those miles and all that suffering, at the final step, Frodo fails. And that's genuinely startling the first time it lands, because we've spent the entire story assuming the hero would, at the crucial moment, find the strength to do the right thing. That's how these stories usually go. The good person is tested and passes. And Frodo doesn't pass. He gives in. The ring wins. If it were entirely up to Frodo's willpower, the quest would have failed at the finish line, and Sauron would have got the ring back, and that would have been that. Except, of course, it isn't up to Frodo's willpower, and this is where the whole thing turns from an apparent failure into one of the most quietly profound ideas in the story. Because Gol is there. Gol who has followed them all the way, driven half mad by his own centuries of longing for the ring, attacks the invisible Frodo, bites the ring, finger and all, right off his hand, and then, in his ecstasy at finally having it back, dances too close to the edge and topples into the fire, ring and all. And so, the ring is destroyed not by Frodo's virtue, but by Gollum's greed, in an accident, at the last possible second. Now, some people read that and feel a bit cheated, like the hero didn't really earn the ending, like it happened by luck rather than by merit. But I think that reading misses what Tolkien was actually doing, and it's the opposite of a flaw. The whole point being made is that no one, not Frodo, not Gandalf, not the greatest and best person you could name, could have willingly destroyed the ring at that spot. We established that right back at the beginning with Isildur. The ring's power at the heart of Sauron's realm is simply too great for any will to overcome. So Frodo was always going to fail there, because everyone was always going to fail there. And that means the quest could only ever succeed through something other than a single hero's strength. It succeeded because of mercy, specifically because Frodo and Bilbo had again and again chosen not to kill Gol when they easily could have, chosen to pity the wretched creature instead. And it's precisely because Gol was still alive, spared by that mercy, that he was there at the end to do the thing Frodo couldn't. The pity of two hobbits across two adventures ends up, without anyone planning it, saving the entire world. So Frodo didn't fail, not really. Or rather, his failure was built into the design and covered by grace. He got the ring to the one place it could be unmade, at a cost that nearly killed him, and then a chain of small kindnesses he'd shown along the way reached forward and finished the job his own hand couldn't. I find that far richer than a straightforward triumph of willpower. It says the world isn't saved by the strongest person gritting their teeth hardest. It's saved by mercy shown to someone who didn't deserve it, paying off in a way nobody could have foreseen. Which is a lovely thing to carry off to sleep, honestly, that the small kind choices might matter more than the grand heroic ones, and in ways you'll never see coming. If you've only seen the films, you think the story ends with the ring destroyed, the king crowned, a big, tearful goodbye at the harbour, and the hobbits going home to the Shire to find it exactly as they left it, green and peaceful and untouched. And that's a lovely ending, and I understand completely why the films chose it. But it isn't how the book ends, and the thing the book does instead is, for a lot of readers, the whole point, and its absence from the films is the single biggest change of the lot. In the book, the hobbits come home to find the Shire wrecked. While they were away saving the world, their own little corner of it was quietly taken over and ruined. The trees have been cut down, the old mill replaced with an ugly, polluting one, belching smoke. The cheerful disorder of hobbit life replaced with rules and bosses and grim industrial misery, and the whole thing run by a gang of thugs under a familiar hand. Because it turns out the villain behind it, hiding and diminished but still spiteful, is S.A.H. Ruman, the fallen wizard, taking a small mean revenge on the hobbits who helped bring him down by spoiling the one place they loved most. This whole chapter is called The Scouring of the Shire, and the 4 hobbits who left as timid homebodies come back as hardened, capable people who have seen real war, and they rouse their neighbours and throw the occupiers out themselves. And you can see straight away why Jackson cut it. After the enormous climax of the ring being destroyed and the king being crowned, to then have another whole conflict, a smaller domestic one back home, would feel, in a film, like the story refusing to end. Audiences would be checking their watches. Films need to crest and then come down, and one more battle, after the big one, throws the shape off. So from a pure filmmaking standpoint, cutting it was almost certainly the right call, and the films are better paced for it. But here's what gets lost, and it's a lot. The Scouring of the Shire is, in many ways, the whole reason Tolkien wrote the thing the way he did. The point he's making is that you cannot go off and fight a great evil in a far-off land, and then come home and find home magically preserved and innocent, waiting for you unchanged. The war follows you back. Evil isn't just something that happens in dark towers far away. It creeps into ordinary places, into your own village, and sometimes the people who went off to face the big darkness are the only ones with the eyes to recognise the small one when it turns up on their doorstep, and the hands to deal with it. It's also about the cost that gets carried home. The hobbits win the Shire back, but Frodo in particular is too wounded by everything to enjoy the peace he fought for, and that's the quiet tragedy the book ends on. He saved the Shire, but he can't really live in it anymore. That's why he eventually leaves. Without the Scouring, the film's Shire is a kind of paradise the hobbits get to return to, unspoiled, which makes it a sweeter and simpler ending. With the Scouring, the book says something harder and truer, that going home is complicated, that the world you left doesn't stay frozen while you're gone, and that some wounds don't heal just because the war is over. I don't think either version is wrong. The film wanted to send you out on a note of earned peace, and it does that beautifully. The book wanted to tell you that peace has to be defended even in the smallest places, and that the ones who defend it sometimes pay a price they never get refunded. For a quiet night like this, I find myself rather glad both versions exist. You can pick whichever ending you need, depending on how the day's been. Here's a question that seems basic, and then gets slippery the moment you look at it directly. What was SOW Ron physically? What did he actually look like? Because if you've only seen the films, your honest answer is probably, he was a big flaming eye on top of a tower, a giant lidless searchlight eye, wreathed in fire, swivelling about looking for the ring. And that's a striking image, but it does raise the odd question of how a Dark Lord conquers kingdoms and forges rings and loses fingers to a young man with a broken sword. The films lean very hard on the eye, partly because it's a wonderfully cinematic way to represent a looming, watchful evil without having to put a bloke in a costume, and partly because it keeps S.O. Ron as this abstract, dreadful presence, rather than a character you could imagine fighting. And the eye does come from the books. Characters talk about the eye of Sauron, the great searching gaze, and when Frodo looks into Galadriel's mirror or into the Seeing Stone, the eye is what he feels turning toward him. That sense of being hunted by an enormous attention. So the eye is real as an image, as the way his terrible watchfulness feels to the people he's hunting. But in the books, the eye is much more of a symbol, a way of describing his presence and his vigilance than a literal giant eyeball sitting on the tower like a lighthouse. Sauron in the books does have a physical form. In the deep past, he could take fair and beautiful shapes, which is how he deceived people into accepting the rings in the first place. And by the time of the War of the Ring, he has a form again, a physical body, terrible to behold, and there's even a passing mention that this form has a hand with fingers, one of them missing, the very finger that was cut off with the ring long ago. So the real SOW Ron is a being with a body, who lost a physical finger, who can be described as having a shape, and the eye is the way his enemies experience his searching malice from a distance, rather than his entire actual anatomy. The reason this matters, and the reason I think the film's made a smart trade, is that the literal floating eye is easier to be afraid of and harder to think about. A bodiless eye can't be reasoned with, can't be humanized, can't accidentally become sympathetic. It's pure threat. Whereas a SOW Ron with a body, a history, a face he once used to charm people, is a more complex and in some ways more frightening villain, because he was once beautiful, once persuasive, once something other than a monster, and chose this. The films wanted the clean dread of the searchlight. The books present the deeper horror of a fallen angelic being who used to be able to look like almost anything he wanted, and ended up as a disembodied, power-hungry presence rather than a clearly described monster. Neither is a mistake, but if you ever find yourself wondering how an eyeball forged a ring, the answer is that it didn't, and the eye was always more of a feeling than a face. Here's one that never gets the attention the Eagles get, but I think about it more than I probably should, and it's the kind of homely, practical question that's perfect for a night like this. What did they eat? Across all those hundreds of miles, through wilderness and mountains and the dead grey wastes near Emordor, what were Frodo and Sam actually living on? Because a very long walk is, before it's anything heroic, a very long series of meals you have to somehow carry with you. The story does give it a bit of thought, more than most adventures bother to, and the main answer is Lembus, the elvish waybread. The elves of Lothlorien send the travellers off with this special bread, wrapped in leaves, that keeps for ages and is astonishingly nourishing. A single bite of it, we're told, is enough to keep a grown traveller going through a full day's march. And it's clearly a bit magical, in the gentle way elvish things always are, sustaining not just the body but the spirit somehow, keeping you on your feet when ordinary food would have run out or gone stale long ago. It's a lovely invention, actually, because it solves the boring logistics problem in a way that fits the world. Of course the elves have perfect trail bread. Of course it does. Everything the elves make is quietly better than it needs to be. But even with the magic bread, if you're the sort of person who likes to poke at these things while you're drifting off, the sums get a little wobbly the deeper into the journey you go. Because by the end, in the final grind across Mordor itself, Frodo and Sam are in a genuinely dead land. There's no game to hunt, nothing growing, no friendly farms, and crucially, almost no water. And a person can push on without food for a surprisingly long time. But water is the one that doesn't negotiate. You need it regularly, or you simply stop. And the closer they get to the mountain, the more the story leans on the sheer will of the two of them. On Sam, in particular, counting and rationing every last drop from their bottles, agonising over whether there'll be enough left for the walk they know they won't be walking back from. That's some of the most quietly harrowing stuff in the whole book, honestly. Not the battles, two exhausted friends working out that they have enough water to get there and none to get home, and deciding to go anyway. The films, for their part, mostly wave the food question away, as films do, because watching people portion out crackers is not gripping viewing, and there's a memorable moment where the whole business of the waybread becomes less about nutrition and more about goal, driving a wedge between the two hobbits, framing Sam for eating more than his share, which is a clever bit of storytelling, turning the provisions into an emotional weapon rather than a logistical detail. But it does rather skip past the underlying question of how two small people cross that much hostile ground on that little. And the honest answer, if you want one, is a mixture of magic bread doing a lot of heavy lifting, ferocious rationing, and a story that knew when to let willpower and love quietly cover the gap that arithmetic couldn't. And I don't mind that at all, because I think the food is doing something in the story beyond keeping them alive. The lembas running low, the water being counted drop by drop, the growing hunger, All of it is a way of measuring how far past the ordinary limits these two have gone. The emptier their packs get, the more you feel how far from home they are, how completely they've walked off the edge of the survivable world. By the very end, they're more or less running on nothing but the need to finish. There's a moment near the top of the mountain where Frodo realizes he can't even remember the taste of food, or the sound of water, or the feel of grass anymore, that it's all been burned away by the journey. And it's devastating precisely because it's so small and physical. It's not a grand speech. It's a hungry, thirsty person who's forgotten what comfort was. So the real answer to what did they eat is elvish bread, less and less of it, and finally, almost nothing but stubbornness. And the water question is the one that genuinely should have stopped them and didn't, because the story reaches the point where it stops being about logistics and becomes about two people who have decided to keep going until they can't, and then keep going a bit past that. You could call the thinness of the provisions a plot hole. I'd rather call it the place where the practical stuff quietly hands over to the emotional stuff, which is exactly where a story like this is always heading anyway. Nobody remembers the ring quest as a tale about packed lunches, but the packed lunches and the running out of them are part of how you feel the weight of the walk. Sometimes the small domestic detail is what makes the enormous thing land. Now there's a whole category of these that don't really deserve a section each. They're the small ones, the little snags you notice on a rewatch that make you tilt your head for a second and then smile. None of them dents the story in the slightest. They're just pleasant to turn over. So let me gather a handful of my favourites and lay them out gently, in no particular order, the way you'd empty out your pockets at the end of a long walk. There's the mithril shirt. Bilbo gives Frodo a lightweight coat of mail made of mithril, this precious silver dwarf metal, that Bilbo received from Thorin Oakenshield as part of his reward on his own adventure. And at one point Gandalf mentions, more or less in passing, that the value of that little shirt was greater than the entire Shire and everything in it. The whole Shire. All those fields and holes and villages and mills worth less than one hobbit-sized vest. Which means Frodo spends the entire journey wearing something worth more than his whole homeland under his ordinary travelling clothes. And it more or less never comes up again, except when it quietly saves his life by stopping a spear. I love the casualness of it. Here, lad, wear this priceless national treasure under your shirt, don't make a fuss. There's the business of the glowing swords. Elvish blades light up blue when orcs are near, which is genuinely useful. An early warning system built into your weapon. Bilbo's little sword, Sting, does it, and Frodo carries it, and it works a treat. And yet, as some sharp readers have noticed, nobody ever really warns anybody about the properties of these elf-made things, or about half the enchanted gifts flying around. We covered the deeper version of this with the Seeing Stone earlier, the difference between a blessing and a channel, so I won't chew it over again. But on the small scale, it's a funny little inconsistency of attention. Great care taken over some magical objects, and a shrug over others that seem nearly as remarkable. There are the distances, which are my favourite bit of pure author trouble, because Tolkien knew about this one, and couldn't fix it. When you try to line up how far and how fast people travel in The Hobbit against the proper map and scale, he later worked out for The Lord of the Rings, the numbers don't quite agree. The proportions of the dwarves' journey in the earlier book don't match the geography of the later one. And the people who study this closely have noted that Tolkien tried to reconcile the two and simply couldn't find a clean solution, so he left it, because sorting it out would have meant rewriting things that were better left alone. I find that oddly comforting. The man who built an entire world with its own calendars and languages still ended up with a map that didn't fully agree with itself and decided he could live with it. So can I. There are the Horns of Rohan. In the films, at the Great Battle, the horsemen of Rohan arrive to catch the enemy by surprise, gaining the huge advantage of a surprise cavalry charge, and then they line up along the top of a ridge and blow an enormous number of very loud horns to announce that they've arrived before they charge, which is magnificent and also does rather throw away the surprise you just spent so much effort setting up. It's the most glorious way imaginable to unsneak an attack, but you wouldn't cut it for anything, because the sound of those horns coming over the hill at first light is one of the best moments in the whole trilogy. Sometimes the rule of, "this is too good not to do it," beats the rule of, "this makes tactical sense." I'm on the side of the horns. There's a lovely little one about swords and memory. In The Hobbit, a pair of ancient elvish blades turn up in a troll's horde, and the orcs of the mountains recognise them by name and are terrified of them, though the story never states that this is because of what those swords did in battles thousands of years earlier. But by the time of The Lord of the Rings, when one of those very same swords is being swung around in the same general region, the orcs don't seem to react to it at all. The reputation that was so vivid in one book has quietly evaporated in the next. It's the kind of thing you'd only spot if you read them back to back, and it means nothing, and I enjoy it anyway. There's a tiny timing slip with Gimli, the dwarf. At one point he makes a remark about the last time he felt a certain way, being deep in the underground places of the world, referring back to an experience that, when you check the timeline, hadn't actually happened that long ago at all. Certainly not long enough to be reminiscing about it like an old memory. The people who put together the detailed companion notes for the book spotted this and decided to leave it be, because fixing it would have meant rewriting the dialogue. And it's the sort of thing a character might just say loosely anyway, the way we all round our own memories up or down when we're talking. A dwarf being a bit dramatic about the passage of time is hardly a crime. And there's the ring's whole invisibility business, which, if you sit with it, is slightly backwards. Putting the ring on makes you vanish from ordinary sight, which feels like it should make you safer, harder to find. But what it actually does is drag you halfway into the shadow world, where the wraiths live, which makes you far more visible to exactly the things you least want to be seen by. Every time Frodo puts the ring on to hide from danger, he's really lighting himself up like a beacon for the most dangerous hunters of all, and pulling the enemy's attention straight to himself. The thing that seems like it makes you invisible actually makes you the most visible you can possibly be, just to the wrong audience, which is a neat little trap when you think about it. The tool that feels like safety is the one that gives you away. There's the counting game, which is pure fun. During the Great Siege battle, Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf, who spend the whole story in a prickly friendship, turn the fighting into a competition over who can kill more of the enemy, calling their tallies out to each other over the noise. It's a brilliant character beat, the two of them bickering like brothers in the middle of a bloodbath. It's also, if you're feeling pedantic, a slightly odd thing to be keeping precise score of when you're both meant to be desperately fighting for your lives against overwhelming numbers. But I wouldn't lose it for anything. It tells you everything about the pair of them in about 10 seconds. And it's the kind of gallows humour that real people actually reach for when things are at their worst. So it rings true even while the arithmetic of it is faintly absurd. And there's the great melancholy one, which isn't really a plot hole at all so much as a thing the films never quite explain to a casual viewer, which is why the elves are all leaving. Throughout the whole story, there's this undertow of the elves packing up and sailing away west over the sea. For good, and if you don't know the background, it can feel a bit unmotivated, like they're just abandoning everyone at the worst possible moment. The truth is that the age of the elves is simply ending. Their time in the world is drawing to a close by design. The magic is fading out of Middle-earth, and even if the good side wins, the elves know that winning means a world made safe for men and hobbits, not for them. So their leaving isn't cowardice or convenience, it's a long, sad, dignified goodbye to an entire age, which gives the whole ending its bittersweet colour, and explains that final scene at the harbour that makes everyone cry without always knowing exactly why. I could keep going. There's always one more of these, but that's a decent handful, and not one of them dims the thing for me. Quite the reverse. A cautious little story, told safely and kept small, leaves no loose ends because it never risked any in the first place. This one risked everything. One man building whole languages in the margins of a children's adventure that quietly grew into a myth, and loose ends are simply what that kind of reaching leaves behind. I'll take the loose ends every time. They come attached to the good stuff, and that feels like the right place to stop wandering. We've covered a fair stretch of ground, birds that could have carried it there, and the sound reasons they held off. A blue-coated fellow, the ring simply slid off. A dark lord who never thought to bolt his own back door. A prophecy that came true sideways. Through a hobbit and a woman, and a forgotten knife from a grave. Wizards who drifted off the edge of the map. A spider standing in for an entire garrison. An author quietly editing his own earlier book, and tucking the join into the story. A quest that only worked because it was allowed to come apart at the very last step. Small snags, big ones, and a whole drawer of odd little ones in between, and not one of them, if I'm honest, cools how I feel about the thing. If anything, it runs the other way. A story only throws up this many puzzles when it has reached for a tremendous amount, and this one reached about as far as a story can. A whole invented world, ages deep, then handed decades later to filmmakers making 1,000 impossible calls at once, then loved and argued about for years by people who care a great deal. Of course there are seams. Of course the logic gives a little here and there to let the thing breathe, or a scene gets shifted and leaves a gap behind it. I don't read those as failures. I read them as the fingerprints of something straining to be enormous and mostly getting there. And under all of it, the same quiet idea keeps floating up, the one the whole story seems to be built around once you clear away the swords and the armies. That the world doesn't get saved by the mightiest person pushing hardest. It gets saved by small people who keep going with no good reason to, by mercy handed to someone who hadn't earned it, by an ordinary kindness coming back around in a way nobody could ever have arranged. A gardener and his friend walking because somebody had to. Sit with almost any of tonight's questions long enough, and you end up back there. The small choices outweigh the grand ones, and the ones who least want the burden turn out to be exactly the ones you can trust to carry it. There's plenty more where this came from, if you ever fancy it. A whole night on the Hobbit, perhaps, or a slow trip back into the elder days and the first Dark Lord, or an evening spent purely on everything the films quietly altered. Another time. For now, this is plenty. However tonight finds you, I hope it has been an easy, unhurried way to see the day out. The ring is in the fire, the king has his crown, and the puzzles will still be sitting here, warm and unsolved, whenever you feel like turning them over again.